Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this session. We're really glad that you're here. My name is Suzanne McCotter and I'm the Dean of the School of Education. We are so thrilled to welcome Dr. LaGarrett King to TCNJ today, even though it's virtual. Dr. King, we've got a beautiful campus. We wish you could be here in person. Hopefully that'll happen sometime in the future. Dr. King is a faculty member in the Social Studies Education Department and a leader of the Carter Center for K-12 Black History Education at the University of Missouri. I am grateful, as all of us are, to the Special Education, Language, and Literacy Department in the School of Education and the Division of Inclusive Excellence for making this happen. And very special thanks to Drs. Nadia Pangsafar and Matt Hall from the CEL Department for their coordination and communication. Before we turn to Dr. King, I just want to say a word about social studies education. Social studies is a subject that does not always get the respect it deserves when we talk about education and schools. It's not a tested subject in most states. When more time needs to be given to literacy and math instruction, it's often taken out of the social studies allocation. That emphasis on skills is clearly important, but the decreased focus on how disciplines like history, political science, government, economics, how they intersect to create the social environments in which we live has a cost. And we've seen that cost in recent years. Without that context and knowledge, our collective ability to draw conclusions about the world around us is diminished. I am grateful to be able to draw on Dr. King's social studies expertise today. His talk will focus on the topic towards a Black historical consciousness for Black history. Dr. King received his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin after an 8-year teaching degree in Georgia and Texas. Dr. King, my teaching career has some years in Georgia too. Maybe we can exchange notes later, but I see you were in Atlanta. I was in Athens. His primary research interest examines how Black history is interpreted and taught in schools and society. He also researches critical theories of race, teacher education, and curriculum history. Dr. King has received 2 early career scholar awards for the Critical Issues in Curriculum and Cultural Studies Special Interest Group of the American Educational Research Association and the College and University Faculty Assembly of the National Council for the Social Studies, 2 preeminent organizations in our field. He's also been published in scholarly journals such as Theory and Research in Social Education, Race, Ethnicity, and Education, the Journal of Negro History, and Teaching Education. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. King for his talk today and thank him again for joining us.
Thank you, Dean Lakota. I appreciate it. Greetings, everyone. I am so delighted to be here this afternoon to speak with you and learn with you about this notion of Black history education. And of course, as the Dean mentioned, I am LaGarrett King. If you are on the Twitterverse, you can feel free to tweet any sayings or tweet any thoughts that you may find interesting. I look forward to engaging with everyone later on. Just a quick tad bit, I may have to pause just for a little bit after an hour, just to ensure that my young learners are in class, right, as we're still doing virtual learning here. So I want to start a little bit by some quick announcements, and then I'm going to get into this notion of what is Black history education, focus a little bit on ed policy, talk about my Black history framework, a Black historical consciousness, and if we have some time, we'll have some question and answering, and also all my thank yous. I want to thank Nadia and Nakia for their work in bringing me out, and I'm so excited to be here. It seems like we planned this such a long time ago, and it always feels good to actually get started. So, happy Black History Month, everybody, right? So I am the founding director of the Carter Center for K-12 Black History Education at the University of Missouri. And when we think about Black History Month, a legacy that's almost 100 years old, we will celebrate 100 years in 2026. But we have to remember Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Negro History Week in 1926, started the celebration in honor for school children to showcase and demonstrate the knowledge that they learned about Black history from the entire year. It's never been meant to only teach Black history during that week, now a month, right? So we urge everybody, right, during February and any other ethnic celebration, we use this time as a time for advocacy, celebration, and reflection for our curriculum. And what I would like us to do is focus more on curriculum and as well instructional transformation as we begin to really understand this notion of equity within our K-12 schools. So again, happy Black History Month. Hopefully we're using this time to reflect and showcase and demonstrate and advocate for our knowledge that we talk about Black history year round. So in honor of Black History Month for us at the Carter Center, we have a few Black History Month events that you all are welcome to join us. Of course, for those that missed the first two sessions, you all can join us for February 27th, where we have Dr. Kim Parker and Miss Ariel Johnson, who will teach a little bit about teaching Black boys in literature, right? To humanize Black boys through literature. I am so excited about this presentation, and of course, all times are central. And if you would like to join us March 6th, we're going to have a special community education business forum where we talk about how do we educate as well as enhance entrepreneurship through Black history education. And I'm so excited to have Janaea Hines, who is our moderator. She's 16 years old. She has a business called Slay It Proud, Black history type t-shirts. We also have Freddie Taylor, who's owner and operator of Urban Intellectuals, $1 million corporation with the Black history flashcards. Brandon Brown from Schoolyard Rap. He has a Black history channel for schools. Dr. Khaled Alakim, who owns Black History Mobile Museum, where he goes all around the country with his museum, and Ms. Annika Johnson, who teaches about Africa very, very dearly. So we look forward to seeing you all if you all are interested in joining us on Saturday mornings. Also, our Super Bowl, right, happens every July, where we have our Teaching Black History Conference, right? These are our first three, and this is our fourth one this year. Last year was our first one virtual, and we had over 1,000 educators from around the world, from the UK, from Canada to Australia, New Zealand, and of course, the United States. So we are real excited this year to have our theme of teaching Tulsa's Black Wall Street, as we are commiserating 100 years since that horrific massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But our main focus here is that we're humanizing, right, all these different Black Wall Streets that we ever had throughout our country, right? We're humanizing before, during, and after what happened to these particular people. Who are these people that we just lump into the Tulsa Race Massacre? Secondarily, we'll talk about the history of race massacres all over. So you'll have over 60, 70 presentations of educators from around the globe. Typically, these are K-12 educators that will provide workshops for our participants, and it's great. Just like last year, we had over 1,000. I'm expecting way more. We're welcoming Dr. Gloria Lassen-Billings to be one of our featured speakers, as well as Mr. Hannibal Johnson. And down here are the links to registration. And if you feel like you want to submit a proposal, they're due on the 28th, please do that. It's $99 for 3 days, July 23rd through the 25th. So we look forward to seeing many different people there this summer. All right, so I got the announcements out the way, and we're ready to go ahead and get started. I just want to go ahead and start off by saying this is not a safe space. Okay, all right, this is definitely not a safe space. All right, now I make sure that I say that, right, to help people understand that this is not going to be a place where feelings or aspects are going to be looked upon. What I'm going to try to do is really kind of get at the gist of what is our problem with Black history education. If we think of Black history education as exercise, right? A lot of us this past year may have gained a little COVID weight there, right? So a lot of us are trying to lose that, right? Including myself. Now, when we exercise, we understand that we have to work a little bit. We have to put strain on our bodies. We have to ensure that we are working really hard, right? Sweating, so we can see gains, whether or not we want to lose weight, whether or not we want to gain muscle, whether or not we just want to stay healthy. Now, when we think about that and we can kind of compare it to educational policy, we've been trying to do this thing of Black history education. We've been trying to get Black history education right since the late 1800s, after the Civil War. And we just cannot get it right. One of the reasons why we can't get it right is that we don't want to put stress and strain in helping us understand why we just can't get it right. In many respects, what we're doing is we're walking 2 miles per hour on the treadmill for 10 minutes. And anybody know that when you try to get in shape, that little 2 miles per hour on 10 minutes on the treadmill does nothing. In fact, this presentation is a racialized space. Within a racialized space, we may feel uncomfortable. We may question ourselves. You may question me. You may get upset with me. You may begin to kind of rethink your whole existence, right? But the purpose is, I want us to pick up a sweat. I want us to work really hard in terms of understanding what is equity, what is true equity within our history curriculum, in our schools, as well as in our society. So I want to start off with an example of what a racialized space looks like. It's a short clip from Saturday Night Live, taken a few years ago. So I'm gonna start this, and of course, if you have anything, feel free to comment in the chat, or if you have any questions, make sure you begin to start putting it in the Q&A function.
February is Black History Month, and we have a presentation from Kevin, Tyrese, and Michelle. Get on up here. All right.
Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman. Hold up, it's that time of the year again. It's our month to shine. Everybody lend your ear again. We about to get it in and set it off mentally. They really don't teach you stuff in school, it's a mystery. Black history, our forefathers paved the way. Here's 28 reasons to hug a Black guy today. Number 1, we deserve a chance. 2 through 28, slavery. 28 reasons, so many reasons to give a Black guy a hug. So many moments, so many heroes. So show our people love.
White people, we ain't trying to brawl. You know we ain't mad at all of y'all. We love Michael McDonald and Daryl Hall. Put your hands up if you're down with the cause. Keep them up if your ancestors owned us.
Number 3, slavery. Number 4, slavery. Number 5, slavery. Number 6, slavery. Number 7, slavery. 22, Jazz. I'm kidding. Slavery.
I hear what you're saying, and that's real hip, but allow me to play devil's advocate. Sit down. I'm sorry.
28 reasons for the season. Power to the people. Yeah, put your hands up. So many moments, so many heroes.
Very cool. Very sorry and very cool.
All right. So much to unpack there, right? So much. But this small clip represents the ways in which our society focuses on Black history, or how we think about Black history. The music is a metaphor, right? But let's look at the class. You have 3 Black students, probably their own Black students in the class. Everybody is, excited about hearing these Black students. You never know. Might be the first time these Black students have talked all year or presented all year, particularly for something they really wanted to do, right? They started off right. The music is all chippy, it's catchy, and we like, oh yeah, this is what I like. And then they start saying the people that we really like to hear. We like to hear about Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, right? Because we have made these people safe.
Right.
And we have not made them controversial. They're part of kind of this notion of the American dream, and people are really good. But something happens when the music stops and we start slavery. We start talking about things that are very serious concerning Black history, and everybody clams up. They begin to look around the room like, oh, we really talking about this? Oh, okay, and of course, there's always going to be somebody that's going to say, let's play devil's advocate. And we know the script, right? We know, there were men and women of their times. Well, there were abolitionists during that time. So they had a choice. They decided to own people. They weren't bad to their slaves. They were nice to their slaves. And the whole trope of everything that we do. But until we begin to really take Black history seriously, right, we will still continue to act that way in our society. In 1929, Carter G. Woodson, I mentioned him earlier, he helped establish Negro History Week. And for people that are part of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, they will always remind me that Carter G. Woodson is an Omega man, and they helped create Negro History Week. So I definitely want to get that out there. But Carter G. Woodson in 1929 stated that instruction with respect to the life and history of the Negro requires probably more preparation than any other phase of social science, for the simple reason that no other problems have been so grossly misinterpreted and so generally misunderstood. To undertake to give instruction in this field, which one is not prepared then, would be a most expensive error for which future generations must pay, in suffering from other misunderstandings like the many which handicap us today. We can take that 1929 quote and put it in 2021, and no one would bat an eye. Instruction with the respect to Black history requires a lot of preparation, right? And I get this everywhere I go. There's always questions from teacher educators, from students, from teachers about what do I need to know? And they say, I don't have that knowledge. And if they do have that type of knowledge, it's misinterpreted and misunderstood. Something I will, get to a little bit later. But the ways in which we teach Black history has continued to haunt us. When we talk about the most expensive era, we can talk about this notion of anti-Blackness. We can talk about this notion of race and racism. We can talk about this notion of discrimination. And what has happened is we have continued this inequitable society in which we live. We also do other things in terms of dehumanizing Black folk based on the history in which we think we know about Black people. In many ways, we need to examine history, Black history, because history is automatically psychologically violent. There's a lot of things that make us uneasy of what happened historically. Now, the problem that we have in K-12 education is that the psychological violence is one-sided. In many ways, what we do is we continue to humanize the oppressor and the enslavers, and we continue to dehumanize those who are oppressed. Prime example.
To the mock. Hannah School is apologizing to a parent after a 5th grade lesson on slavery, a lesson that forced an African-American student to the mock auction block so white students could bid on him. 10 Investigates Paul Aker joins us with the school's response. Paul?
That's right, Andrea. The school says only one parent was upset by this lesson, but that parent was really upset. And the student says he was humiliated by it.
Did you remember the sock game?
At 10 years old, Nico Burton loves his dog, but he's not so fond of social studies, where yesterday he got a painful lesson in American history.
I ended up being a slave.
Nico says his teacher at Gahanna's Chapelfield Elementary divided the class and made some students slaves and others their masters.
At first, I didn't really care, but after people were like bidding on people, it kind of made me a little mad and stuff.
Nico says it got worse when the so-called masters were told to feel the students playing slaves to see if they were worth buying.
They got to look at in your mouth and feel like your legs and stuff to see if you were strong or stuff.
And people were doing that to you?
Yeah.
He felt degraded. He was hurt. Kids picked on him later.
Nico's mom, Anika, says she's astonished.
I feel like that was totally inappropriate. It was racist and degrading.
Gahanna Jefferson School District officials declined to comment on camera, but a spokeswoman claims this was part of a state-required curriculum. She tells 10 Investigates it was a one-time lesson, and in a statement she wrote, "As soon as the concern was brought to our attention, school officials acted promptly to speak with the parent. Then, while we were at Nico's house, his principal called. We overheard his apology.
I'm just shocked nobody has ever said anything about it.
While the family says the apology is nice, Nico says he's still waiting to hear one from his teacher.
And it was kind of mean, and she should have said sorry.
And we contacted the State Board of Education to find out what the law requires. It does call for 5th graders to have exposure to diversity education, but the law does not mention anything about mock slave auctions. For 10 Investigates, I'm Paul Aker.
Now, what's probably more disconcerting about this particular issue is that lesson has been going on for years, right? I'm assuming that this is, a place that may not have a lot of Black students, Black parents, Black people. I don't know, and it really shouldn't matter. But at the end of the day, this lesson has been going on. It's been taught by teachers and people that understand K-12 education, understands that there's new teachers coming in every year. And no one said, wait a minute, this probably should not have been doing, because what are we teaching our kids about Black people? And what are we teaching them about themselves in this power dynamic? Now, some of you all who are familiar with that case may say, well, LaGarrett, that was 10 years ago. I'm sure we have improved. Well, this was 2 weeks ago. A slave stands before you. The slave has disrespected his master by telling him, you are not my master. How will you punish this slave? Again, we understand in elementary school that we teach in teams in elementary school. So there's a team of teachers that didn't even say, wait a minute, we should not do this. This dehumanizes, this misinterprets misrepresents this notion of Black history, right? A slave is a noun. That means that you are something, right? Instead of enslaved, which is a verb, something is done to you. Master, okay, we call it enslaver. And instead of talking about the agency as to why the enslaved person refused to be owned, the question centered around domination. The question centered around oppression. The question centered around hegemony, right? And again, every year, we can continue to go on and on and on. I can have a whole presentation just on the improper way in which we use Black history in our classrooms. And all we do is create damage, psychological violence against Black children, whether they're there or not. And it breeds a sickness in our students that grow up that have a certain understanding of who Black people are and how we should treat them. And it's historic. When we think about the slavery math problems from New York and from Georgia, from Los Angeles, it has nothing to do with the South. It's all over. But slavery math problems were in Confederate textbooks. Our expensive error is that we're sick. We can't get this right. We're presenting something that is very dangerous to what I thought we were going into these notions of democracy. So I asked the question, why can't we get this Black history thing right? We've been trying to do this. Black educators, Black community members, Black teachers have been doing this since after the Civil War. The first Black history textbook was written by a principal who realized that the history curriculum was horrible. 1890, Edward A. Johnson, a school textbook for Negro children. One of the reasons why we can't get it right is that we don't like history.
Revolution. So why do we do this? Why do we avoid confronting hard history? Literary performer and educator Reggie Gibson had the truth of it when he said that our problem as Americans is we actually hate history. What we love is nostalgia. Nostalgia. We love stories about the past that make us feel comfortable about the present. But we can't keep doing this. George Santayana.
We like nostalgia, not history. If you study history, history sometimes will disturb you. Studying history sometimes will upset you. Studying history will make you furious at times. If studying history always makes you feel proud and happy, you're probably not studying history. You're studying nostalgia. Another reason why we can't get Black history right is because we don't even know what Black history is. I ask that question a lot. What's Black history? And a lot of people can't really define what Black history is, right? History with Black people, that's typically the response. But when we think about Black history is two things. Our history is two things. History is about identity and history is about humanity. History is the first time that we learn about ourselves, and history is the first time that we learn about people who are othered from us. History is more about the present than it is about the past. Identify who we are, and we act accordingly to that identification. We also act accordingly to how we identify others, right? So there's implications to how we even bring up Black history in our classrooms. First time someone officially learns Black history is third, maybe fourth grade through their US history or their state history courses. And we start with the enslavement period. So Black folk are forever remembered as slaves. Now remember, slave as a noun, right? I'm not talking about this notion of being owned. I'm not talking about this notion of a government law that a federal law that says, oh, you're enslaved. I'm talking about the ways in which people see Black people as slaves. There's disposition. They have no agency. We have to surveil them. And when we really think about what a slave is, they're less than human. So therefore, people always think we have to make them more human, i.e., we have to make them more white, right? History is also about humanity. When you think about a slave, these people are dehumanized. The whole notions of being a person is erased. Remember, history is about identity. History is about humanity. Now, if you want a more Webster dictionary version of history, which will help us kind of think through this notion of Black history, history is a struggle and record of humans in the process of humanizing the world and shaping that world in their own image and interest, right? So history is about someone sitting down and saying, how can I tell my version of the world through my perspectives? I want to humanize the world, but that humanization is based on how I look at humanity, right? On their own image. That's why we always kind of talk about the winners write history, right? And they write it in their own view. Well, let's take that definition, and I'll tell you what's wrong with Black history is if we take that same verbiage, it's the struggle and record of people of African descent in the process of humanizing the world. Remember, we're focusing on perspectives. We shape the world from Black perspectives. Some people may want to say Africanized perspectives, but Black perspectives, and shape the world in our own image and our own interest. So therefore, we have competing definitions here. Black history is a history from Black perspectives. Do we teach Black history through Black perspectives? And what does that mean? Remember, history is about identity. History is about humanity. Any person that can read, right? Any person that has been keeping up with his history policy, right, will understand that our history curriculum, whether it's global history, whether it's US history, is Eurocentric. Even when we, quote unquote, infuse Black history in the curriculum. Therefore, when we don't teach Black history from Black perspectives, what happens? Black history is based on European contact and colonization. Remember, third, fourth grade, the first time that you learn about Black people is through European contact. So what does that say? That indicates that these particular people were not historically important before white people found them. It says that the thousands and thousands and thousands years of history were not important. Now, Howard University professor Greg Carr, I remember him saying, if Black history was 24 hours, slavery was 1 second out of the 24 hours. But that's not how we teach Black history in our schools. Also, Black history is who breaks into white society. We teach what we call Black first. Again, is that person historically important because of their proximity to whiteness? Again, these histories indicate that these people were not historically important before they came in contact with white people or white society. Black history is based on a triad of experiences: slavery, civil war, the civil rights movement. Soon it'll be this notion of Barack Obama, right? You know, kind of the major tropes in Black history. Black history is tied to suffering and trauma. I call it the suffering paradigm. Black history is geared towards Black, heterosexual, middle class, able-bodied men. Black history is focused on messiahs and heroes and heroines, and these people have to be perfect without complexity. In essence, Black history is constructed not to hurt white children's feelings or white people's feelings. It continues to be psychologically violent towards Black students and other non-white students. And you hear it all the time. That's one of the biggest arguments against teaching a true Black history. Well, what about white? What about white? And you have to really listen to what they're trying to say. It's teaching us how to hate. Who is it teaching who to hate? And most importantly, it lacks context and contemporary connections to help us understand our history and our present circumstances. But in many ways, we can't define Black history because we're talking about several different things. I could argue that it's not necessarily Black people in history, right? It's a certain type of Black history that should be taught. Black history is okay if it's suitable for certain worldviews. And by suitable, I mean Black history has to follow this progressive narrative of history. It has to be non-threatening to white folk. And it has to help us keep a passive understanding of who Black people are. Now, when we challenge that progressiveness, when we challenge and threaten white people's understandings, and when we challenge this notion that Black people are passive, then guess what? That Black history is deemed unacceptable. It's called anti-American. It's called not patriotic. Remember, history is about identity and humanity. We can't even have Black history in our own Black history Black history museum. A museum that was created to teach Black history. But if it's that kind of Black history that they don't like, that is progressive, is threatening, then that's not the type of Black history we should teach. You see all these laws all around the country in states stating that if you teach a certain type of Black history, you will not get funded. So why is this, right? So we can ask this question here. I ask this question a lot. Why is teaching Black history hard? And some people would say, oh, well, because we're teaching about race and racism, we're teaching about oppression, we're teaching about this, and it makes us look bad. But in reality, the reason why Black history is so hard, and we're going back to our definition here, is because you have to rethink your whole existence when you teach Black history. In other words, if you're white, right, you're not that historically important. And I say that because our history curriculum teaches us that no matter what the history is, white people are central to that history. Remember, history is about identity. History is about humanity. It's difficult because what people are trying to do is infuse themselves in Black history when they have no reason to be in that narrative. Black history is Black history from Black perspectives through the lenses of Black people. But it's difficult because you've been taught so much that you are historically important. So historically important that you can infuse yourself in everybody's histories and be central or a main character in that history. And that's simply not the truth. In many ways, what we do in our society is we teach about Black history, but we don't teach through Black history. Now, by teaching about Black history, whenever you teach about something, that comes from your perspectives. Your perspective. I am teaching about what happened in this situation. But when you teach through, you take yourself out of the picture and you teach through the voices, the perspectives, and the epistemologies of Black people. And you can erase history and put people. We teach about Black people, but we don't teach through Black people. In many ways, our educational policy refuses to accept diverse perspectives, equity, and multiple histories that make up history. Black history is seen as cosmetic. We focus on notions of quantitative approaches instead of the qualitative rendering in which we're talking about. Right? So we count. Well, you know what? In 1970, we had 4 Black people in the curriculum. 1980, we had 6. 1990, we had 10. 2000, we had 20. We are making progress, people. But not necessarily like, what are we talking about, right? Is that narrative the same? Are we teaching through Black people or are we just about, right? Because simple representation just does not cut it. In many ways, what we need to do is stop thinking about history with a why. That why denotes a singular understanding of history. And when we denote that singular story of history, we revert back to the Eurocentric ways of knowing. But when we think about histories with an IES within history, we understand that there's multiple perspectives of a historical event. We're still in the pandemic, y'all. 2020 was hard for everybody. Or was it? It depends on your perspectives. We all know people that may have been hit very hard economically and health-wise. Some people are really struggling in the economy. Other people are balling. They're making tons of money during the pandemic. We have some communities that have been hit essentially hard. Health-wise, people are passing away. I think I just saw something that we surpassed 500,000 people that passed due to COVID. But there's other communities that haven't seen anyone really sick, right? But there's multiple histories within this history. In many ways, our ed policy focuses on what I would call historical uniformity and historical integration. Now, for historical uniformity, what we believe is that all histories are the same, that every person within that historical era experienced history similarly, right? If you say that Black history or Black people are separate in that particular aspect, that's considered a racist statement. And in many ways, this is Black history that is simply white history in Black face. We're just gonna add these particular people in and just say, hey, y'all were part of this history. But there's no criticality to that. Now, historical integration moves a little bit to this notion of multiculturalism, right? They understand that you need all these histories to tell the story. But the problem is have we changed the historical narrative? Because when you add Black people to the narrative, that history looks totally different. Y'all ready for some examples? I know some of y'all are like, oh man, this is so abstract. I don't know what you're talking about. Historical uniformity and integration. Let's take, I don't know, Independence Day. And I know that may be a different picture, but hear me out. We claim July 4th, 1776 as Independence Day. Why do we do that? Now, again, I get emails, oh, you're saying we shouldn't celebrate July. I didn't say anything about no celebration. Why do we call July 4th Independence Day? When 20% of the population was not, quote unquote, independent, you had indigenous populations that were not included, but yet we call July 4th, 1776 Independence Day, right? Historical uniformity. And we expect to celebrate a country when historically 1776 means nothing to Black people. It means nothing to the majority of Black people who were enslaved, who are descendants of that enslavement. Now, listen to my question. Why do we call July 4th Independence Day? Why do we only have one Independence Day when there's several different Independence Days that we could celebrate? When we think about historical integration, people may say, wow, all right, great. Let's infuse Juneteenth, right? This past summer was the first time I had text messages from white friends of mine wishing me a happy Juneteenth. I thought that was weird. I was like, whoa, this is the first time. I'm 42 years old, and I've never got no message from a white colleague or a white friend of mine saying happy Juneteenth. Now, what am I supposed to do with this particular information? I'm just confused, right? But why do we celebrate July 4th as the only Independence Day? When Juneteenth could be an Independence Day, when the Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. could be an Independence Day, when there's several different Independence Days for other people around the country, but yet we say July 4th is the only Independence Day. So what are you trying to tell us? That we don't matter? I don't know. And then how do we teach Juneteenth? Do we teach Juneteenth as this white savior aspect, General Granger coming to Galveston, Texas, and saying y'all are free and we just jump up and down and celebrate? Or do we teach the ways in which Black people have fought for independence and forced the country to utilize this notion of independence? Historical uniformity, historical integration. We teach through Black people, Independence Days will look a little bit different than how we situate Independence Day. Again, I did not say no one should celebrate July 4th, 1776. What I'm saying is, why do we call it the only Independence Day that we have in this country? Number two, we understand that Black people fought in the American Revolution. They fought for the British, as well as they fight for the American colonists. Now, in our textbooks, if you look at the textbooks, they call these people, those who fought in the British, Black loyalists, and those who fought for the American colonists, Black patriots. Again, why? Why? It is very arrogant to think that you have enslaved, dehumanized people, and all of a sudden, they're fighting a war for the same reasons that you, quote unquote, are fighting this war. That's very arrogant. It's either arrogant or you feel that these people do not have a mind of their own. Why call them Black loyalists when they could give a darn about the British? Why call them Black patriots when they could give a darn about a country being born, the United States of America? Why? They didn't fight because they loved or they were loyal to Great Britain. They didn't fight because they loved or they were patriots to the American cause. They fought in those wars because the British promised them freedom. Lord Dunbar promised them freedom. So therefore, a lot of Black people on these plantations defected to the British military, right? And of course, just like with anything, George Washington and the Continental Army, they denied Black people to fight for the American cause. But after they saw that, number one, the British Army was getting bigger because it had all these Black people going from these plantations to that. And then plus, remember, plantation owners, the wealthy, started to complain that their Black people were leaving, their labor source was leaving. So just as American as anything, right? Okay, well, let's promise them freedom as well. Black people were like, well, shoot, I don't gotta walk to Virginia. I can just walk over here and join the military. I'll just join you. They weren't fighting out of love of no Great Britain. They weren't fighting out of no being patriotic to the American colonists. They were fighting for themselves. Both these places promised them freedom. You will not be enslaved anymore if you work and fight on our behalf. So why call them Black loyalists? Why call them Black patriots? Teaching from Black perspectives. How about Brown versus Board of Education? We teach about Brown versus Board of Education. We teach that the Supreme Court case was one of the best Supreme Court cases ever. It established integration, right? It was just great. It moved these poor Black kids from these horrible Black schools into these wonderful white schools. That's what we imply in the curriculum. But when we teach through Black perspectives, we understand that first of all, Black schools were excellent. They had teachers that were culturally relevant, who was culturally sustaining, who provide rigor for their students. Number three, integration meant not moving to Black schools, but moving into white schools. A lot of the Black community did not want integration. They disagreed with the NAACP because they just wanted equitable schools, not integrating into white schools because they understood the racism that their kids would experience. And plus, if we think about educational policy in the 70s, this notion of the educational gap, the racist notions of the educational gap, because who made white children the norm, began to develop. Why? Brown versus Board of Education. When I was at Clemson University, we had a 60-year anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, and we had people who were the first to integrate South Carolina schools. It was a great question by a student. A student asked, how does you handle racism from your students? From your classmates. The panel overwhelmingly said, we didn't experience racism from our classmates. We played with them. Remember that they were in elementary school. We experienced racism from our teachers. So therefore, what teachers and educational policymakers did in the 70s is that they blamed the students for the teachers' lack of culturally relevant understandings of these Black kids. These teachers did not want to teach them, and they did not have the tools to teach Black students. See, you see how that history is different? Black history is totally different in the ways in which we understand what we think is history. When we teach through Black perspectives, that particular history just changes. What is historically important to white people is not historically important to Black people. And we have to understand that. It helps you rethink your whole historical existence. You're not that historically important when we deal with notions of racialized histories. Black history is about histories from Black perspectives. Black history is about transformation, not transmission. Black history is about being conscious of ideas, histories, and actions and people who have defined various lived experiences. Black history is about being contentious to the progress of historical narratives, not aid in this anti-Blackness. So here, instead of a history curriculum that's uniformed or a history curriculum that's integrated, we need to focus on a history curriculum that's contentious. In many respects, Black history is not the American history that we fantasize about. When we think about Black history as something that's contentious, we have to realize that Black history has its own entry points. Black history has its own timelines. Black history has its own perspectives and voices. And Black history has its own people. And even if we share in understanding those people, Black teaching through Black history understands those people differently, right? Let me do a quick break to make sure my kids are in class, and I'll be right back in just 1 minute.
And I'll just jump in here. This is Dr. McCotter again to say that if you have any questions that you are hoping that Dr. King will address by the end of his speech, just put them into the Q&A forum down at the bottom of the screen.
I do apologize. It is crazy in this house. Got to get people ready for school. I got my contractor here. It's just so much stuff going on. All right. So Black history is contentious of kind of the history in which we understand, or the current history that we learn right now. And I do want to leave some time for questions. So I'm gonna go through real quick. When we think about contentiousness and teaching through Black people, one thing that irritates me a little bit is the ways in which we understand freedom and how we teach notions of freedom. So I've been in classes all over the country, and I guess world, right? You know, Canada and the UK. But in US, you know, context, and I see a lot of the posters of Patrick Henry, right? Give me liberty and give me death, right? And in our history classrooms, we focus on violence as a means for freedom. We celebrate it. It's the United States. Bombs bursting in air, July 4th, 1776, July 4th, firecrackers, right? You know, and if y'all are anything like us, you know, they start right at dusk and they continue all the way until early morning, right? Popping firecrackers. But when we teach about Black people, particularly in the civil rights movement, we help them understand that no, non-violence is the only way in which you can achieve freedom. Really? So Henry Highland Garnett says the same thing. I'd rather die free than to live to be a slave. The same thing that Patrick Henry said. But yet we don't focus on notions of Black people being violent in search for freedom when our country was created off of violence. Every war that we get into is based on freedom. So why do we teach this notion of nonviolence when it comes to Black folk and other non-white folk as a understanding of the only way that we can achieve liberty is through nonviolence, when we know that violence is an answer to freedom? And I'm not saying that we should say, hey, you know, conduct violence, but what I'm saying is the teaching of it. Why do we construct this notion of nonviolence when violence is an appropriate mechanism for freedom. So what can we do? Let's skip on to the Black History Framework. What can we do to present, first, teach through Black history, right, or through Black people? And how can we present a more humanistic aspect of Black history? All right. So I'm working on 8 principles. I think if you read the social education piece, it was based on 6 principles. I'm developing the last 2. So I kind of go over principles 1 through 6 and kind of talk briefly about how I'm thinking about principles 7 and 8. Now, these are principles that I believe that should be explored throughout a child's whole entire educational career. So from kindergarten to 12th grade, all right? This does not mean that every lesson, right, every unit should have these particular principles, but throughout the 13-year educational career of students, that they should infuse these particular principles, all right? And these principles come from Black teachers, Black historians, and Black educators since the 1800s, right? So essentially, Black people have been telling teachers how to teach Black history forever, right? It's just that we're not listening, right? So principle 1, you can't teach Black history without teaching about systemic power, oppression, and racism, right? This is extremely important, mainly because these institutional policies, these structural aspects of our society, still influences Black lived realities, from where we stay, right? From our health, from our education, right? To various different aspects of our whole society, institutional racism still pervades our society, right? Anti-Blackness pervades our society, right? Now, you can't teach Black history simply based on oppression. When you focus mainly on oppression with Black history, what you do is you create this victim narrative, right? Now, to be clear, Black people have never been simply victims. They've been victimized, but they're not simply victims. So that brings us to principle number 2, agency, resistance, and perseverance. Black people have always fought against oppression, whether it's proactive or reactive. They always have. Key to understanding about Black agency is understanding agency is 2 things. There's a type of agency that's meant to destroy the system, and there's agency that is meant to live a better life within the system, right? And it's very important for us to teach both. Now, the everyday acts of resistance living within the system is the most prominent acts of agency, right? So if you're teaching the enslavement period, it's Black people working slow, pretending they are sick, right? Acting like they don't understand, right? Those are all acts of agency, pretending they were pregnant, right? All acts of agency, right? And we understand agency to tear down the system as slave revolts, right? Riots, et cetera, right? So it's very important to understand 2 types of agency within that notion of principle 2. Principle 3, you can't teach Black history without teaching about Africa, the African diaspora, and the various ways in which Black people migrated around the world, right? Now, this is telling us that we should not start Black history with slavery. We should always start with ancient Africa, right? We cannot start Black history with slavery. We have to start with ancient Africa, right? We need to begin to humanize. And I say that because when we start US history classes, we always start with Europe, right? Okay. It provides us with context. It provides us with kind of this notion of humanity, right? For these particular people to know who they were. They were not simply slaves, they were enslaved, right? They were people before they became part of kind of this European enslavement triangle aspect, right? African diaspora is extremely important because it's helpful for us to understand that Blackness is global and that there's differences and similarities between Black people in various different parts of the world, right? All right, so principles 1 through 3 are pretty standard in any Black history program around the country. Principle 4 is a little bit different. We have to realize that sometimes we define Black history through oppression and liberation. That's typically where we infuse Black history, is whether they are being oppressed and then how they're fighting against that oppression. Sometimes Black people were just Black people. Black people were just people. They just did certain things, and it was historically important. So teaching about Black joy and Black love is essential to the ways in which we understand Black people as human. Sometimes historically important aspects does not necessarily focus strictly on notions of oppression. And it's key to understand that even in aspects of oppression, you can experience joy. Now, the difficulty of this is, how do you teach Black joy and Black love without trivializing oppression, right? And again, it's about this notion of infusing all these particular concepts within our history curriculum. Principle 5 deals with Black identities and intersectionality. Again, just like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we focus on this notion of Black, heterosexual, middle class, able-bodied Christian men as the dominant Black history trope, the dominant Black history narrative, right? We miss out on Black women, we miss out on the LGBT community, we miss out on all of the various different identities that help us understand Black people in their totality, right? Principle 6. Now, principle 6 is the most controversial of all the principles. Principle 6 is Black historical contention. Now, what Black historical contention is two things. Number one, it helps us understand that Black people are not monoliths, right? So that means that there's been different ways and different understandings of how to solve certain social problems and how to think, right? Second, which is the most controversial, is that sometimes we overcompensate for excluding Black history. And what happens is Black history becomes too pristine and it becomes too perfect. And Black people have never been too pristine and Black people have never been too perfect, right? And what we do when we do that is we dehumanize Black people by making them too perfect. My colleague, Dr. Ashley Woodson, did a study on Black students understanding the civil rights movement. And what she found was that these Black students would say, wow, I can't be like that. I can't make change. I can't be a citizen like that because I'm not Christian. I'm not perfect like these particular people. And every time that we learn something different about our leaders, oh, Dr. Martin Luther King may have cheated on his wife. And then historically, you have to say, so what does that mean for him being a historical figure, right? So we can't make our quote unquote Black historical actors just perfect, right? Principle 7, I'm still developing. It focuses on Black achievement and excellence. Probably the main point for this is that sometimes when we teach about Black history, we teach Black achievement and excellence as the exception. What I'm saying is we should teach Black achievement and excellence as the rule. I think I saw something on Twitter that's saying that it's amazing how you're achieving when a whole system is against you, right? When a whole system is against you, that automatically helps us understand that the achievements and excellence of Black people is the rule and not simply an exception. I'm still building on that one. And principle 8 is about this notion of Black living history and futurism. Black living history is about understanding kind of contemporary notions of people who are achieving historically. And then futurism kind of looks at the future with the philosophy of the history, right, through the past, right? So this is your Black Panthers, right? These are all your kind of Black sci-fi particular aspects that I think is making a really good play in notions in schools right now. So I'm still really developing principle 7 and principle 8. So hopefully next time, right, I would have those principles ready and for you. So to review, we have to rethink how we conceptualize Black history. We have to understand that what is historically important to Black people is a contentious history. And we have to understand Black historical consciousness and their various different principles. So I want to end with a video with one of my favorite shows of all time, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And this is a video of Aunt Vi, the real Aunt Vi, right? For all these Fresh Prince fans, and ways in which, and this is the first time she began to teach Wills and Cartner's Black History class.
Good morning, class. Mom, I'd like to welcome you and say on behalf of the entire class how happy we are to have you here.
You told me, Mr. Banks.
What I always call you? Mom.
My name is not Mom. My name is Professor Banks. That is how I prefer to be addressed. Is that clear, class?
Yes, Professor Banks.
Black American history, gentlemen. From Africa to slavery to the present. Now, we've all heard of Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, and Booker T. Washington. But Black history includes a lot of people whose names and faces aren't remembered today. Now, how many of you have heard the spiritual sung by the slaves?
I have.
Now, listen to this. Follow the drinking gourd. Follow the drinking gourd. Follow the drinking gourd. For the old man's waiting for to carry me to freedom.
That was pretty cool. Yeah.
Now, what do you suppose the purpose of that song was?
Let me handle this one. For those of you unfamiliar with these spirituals, allow me to explain. The slaves used to sing them to keep their spirits up and their minds on God in the face of all the oppression that they suffered.
That was very well put, Mr. Smith, but you're wrong.
Beg your pardon?
That song was written to be used as a secret code of the Underground Railroad.
Secret code, what do you mean?
Well, first of all, can anyone tell me what the Underground Railroad was?
Now, this one I know. The Underground Railroad was a group of people that led the slaves to freedom.
And when was it established?
During slavery.
Well, that covers about 250 years, Mr. Smith. Care to narrow it down a bit?
What do you mean, right now?
Sit down, Mr. Smith. It was established during the 1840s. Harriet Tubman, an ex-slave, was one of the leaders. Now, these gospel songs were actually secret messages sent to tell the runaway slaves how to get to freedom. For example, the drinking gourd referred to the Big Dipper. When the slaves sang, "Follow the drinking gourd," that signaled to the runaway slaves to run towards the Big Dipper. Along the route, they would meet with the abolitionist and escape to freedom.
Well, that's what I meant. Could you teach us one of the songs, Professor?
Well, here's one called "Wade in the Water." Now, this song told the runaway slaves that the best escape route was along the river. Now, late at night, these songs could be heard coming from the slave cabins along the route, guiding the runaways to freedom. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Everybody join in now. Wade in the water. Come on now. Wade in the water, children. Yes. In the water.
God's gonna trouble the water. Didn't say swim, I didn't say backstroke, I said wade.
No.
Now, some of the educators in the audience is like, "Oh man, she was so tough on Will," right? But I think the beautiful thing about this, right, is that Will was very excited to learn. He was very excited to learn a history that he felt that he had some type of connection to, right? But yet, he needed to learn so much. But that did not deter him from being excited. It did not deter him from participating. It did not deter him from continuing to answer questions that he may not have known fully, right? And how many times have our Black students done that in our history classes? Very few, right? Very few. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And we'll have some time for questions, and I'll try my best to answer.
So, Dr. King, there are some questions in the Q&A. Would you like me to read them through, or would you like to go through them on your own?
Let's see what we got here. Q&A?
Yeah.
All right. Just to clarify understanding, in the statement of teaching about Black people instead of through Black people, would an example of this be the inclusion of George Washington Carver in curriculum as, oh, he did something with peanuts, rather than the understanding of George Washington Carver as being involved in a push of economic freedom for Black farmers and other related matters? Yeah, I mean, I think, George Washington Carver was more than just the peanut guy, right? And teaching through Black history would be to really truly understand understand him more than just the peanut guy, right? And understand his humanity, understand his life, understand his influence, right, in society, right, other than just the peanut guy, right? I think sometimes we kind of get into this habit of, oh, this person invented this or this person invented that, but we don't necessarily get to kind of the educational levels, right? We don't really get to their upbringing and what influenced them, right, to do those particular things. So so that's part of it, right? Teaching through Carver, but really I'm talking about utilizing Carver's words to understand Carver a little bit better, right? So for those that who are in history, using primary source documents, based on him and based on others that knew him, et cetera, et cetera. How do you suggest as future educators to approach history curriculum that does not honor Black history through Black perspectives? Well, I think, for you to, so several different things you can kind of do, right? So it's advocacy on your part, and then advocacy, to kind of change policy, right? So for advocacy for your part, no one's stopping you from learning. Right? It's 2021. There's no excuse for us not to know as much as to not know things, right? So I would suggest looking at the blackpast.org, right, as a resource, as an online Black history encyclopedia, where you can get online primary source documents. I would suggest subscribing to Home Team History, which is a YouTube channel that focuses on Africa. I would suggest subscribing to Black History in 2 minutes, on YouTube as beginners. There's several different books. The most classic book is From Slavery to Freedom by John Hope Franklin. I'm working with McGraw-Hill right now on that particular book as a Black history textbooks for high schools, and I'm writing the teacher manual for that. So those are like some aspects of it. If you're in elementary school, I'm working with Nickelodeon right now, writing lesson plans for them concerning different Black history programs. So even like places like Nickelodeon, have resources for teachers. So there's no excuse. And then we move on to, okay, so how can we talk to our social studies coordinators about switching, the textbooks or resources that we have. It's about team teaching. It's about getting substantial professional development, right, for your schools and for your school districts on not only this notion of Black history, because a lot of places want prepackaged curriculum, but really before you can even get to the curriculum, we have to have identity work, right? We have to have identity work so we can be in the right mind frame to actually teach this curriculum, because I can give you prepackaged curriculum and you still do it poorly because you still believe that white people are centered into the historical narrative when they're not. So you're always going to try to put that in there, you know, when it doesn't belong, right? So it is several different things. And hold your teachers accountable, right? If you are a student, hold your teacher educators accountable, right? Ask questions, right? Ask questions, go to office hours, right? And ask those particular questions, right? Suggest books. Real good books that do that will be Hara Zan's, you know, book, as well as Ronald Takaki's A Different Mirror. Those are real good books. Stamped, you know, from Kendi and Reynolds are really good quick reads for young people and for future teachers and novice teachers to read. Do you have recommendations for good children's books that are currently out now to use in classrooms, especially with younger children to teach Black history from perspectives of Black people? Can I give a long list, and maybe that could be sent out for those who registered. There's so many different really good books out there. I definitely, but off the top of my head, I'm kind of, you know, blanking. But I do have a list, a whole Excel file that I can share.
We can share that. Thank you, Dr. King. We can share that with students that we know have attended and faculty as well. So absolutely, if you share that, then we'll get that out.
Okay, great. Realizing now that I mixed up letter details of the, okay. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions when facing pushback. All right, from administrators for the way you teach history in your classrooms. I know a teacher who put a picture of Kamala Harris on her door for Black History Month and received pushback because she isn't considered a safe, like, Jesus Christ. All right, Kamala Harris is a very safe person. I don't really understand that. So that's a school you don't want to be at. I mean, that's a school you do not want to be at. I think it's to, and teachers, from my understanding, most schools may have like a professional development liaison, or, you know, a person that helps develop the professional development throughout the year. Go talk to that particular person, ask for professional development strictly on this particular aspect, because at the end of the day, I'm to the point where if every school almost has this mission about equity and diversity, right? And we have to make sure that they are accountable to their mission statements in terms of educating all students. It doesn't matter if it's a lily white school. It doesn't matter if it's 100% Black school. All schools should be, approaching notions of equity and diversity. I would leave that school as soon as you can find another job, because that school is not necessarily, or that administrator is not necessarily appropriate for those places, particularly if that mission statement is dealing with diversity. Or you can actually talk to the people that are above the principal and lay out your grievances. Or if you have a teachers union, then that's a space as well. But that doesn't make any sense to me. Do you see any potential in having teams of teachers of diverse identities team teach with the emphasis on teaching multiple narratives? Yeah, whenever teachers can, combine their expertise in terms of teaching, right? Because I mean, there's certain teachers that are stronger in other things, and other other aspects. It would be good to do a team teaching activity with those who are comfortable doing that, right? Of course, with teaching, it's all about space and time, for all that. But if you all can make it work, then yeah, do it. Anyone else? I think that's it, right? Any other questions we have?
It does look like that's it for the Q&A, which is actually great timing, because this is about when we needed to finish up. So Dr. King, was there anything else you wanted to share with us, or is this a good time to conclude?
Yeah, I mean, if there's no further questions.
Well, thank you so much for this really thought-provoking presentation, and for all the various different ways in which we can apply this to our work. It did such a nice job of reaching across faculty, across staff, across students. I really, really appreciate it. And I do encourage anyone who's interested in further discussion. There are links in the chat to breakout sessions that are happening. So there's a breakout session at 3 for students and a breakout session at 5 today for faculty and staff. So thank you again, Dr. King. We really appreciate your words today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.